Two black veterans walk into a diner for a quiet cup of coffee. What happens next shocks everyone in the room. The bell over the door jingled as Sergeant James Turner and Corporal Marcus Fields stepped into the small-town diner, their military boots clicking softly against the checkered tile floor. The warm aroma of bacon, fresh biscuits, and brewed coffee filled the air. It was the kind of place where regulars sat at the same booths every morning, where the waitress knew your name, and where outsiders didn't go unnoticed. But these weren't just any outsiders. These men were heroes. James, older and tall with graying temples, wore his crisp army dress uniform with pride. Marcus, younger but equally sharp, had a confident posture that showed discipline and strength. Both had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and had just returned home. All they wanted was a quiet breakfast and a bit of peace. They chose a booth near the back corner, away from the windows. The moment they sat down, conversation in the diner dipped. Forks stopped clinking. One man in overalls nudged his wife and whispered. Another woman narrowed her eyes over her coffee cup. James glanced around. "You feel that," he said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Like we walked into the wrong movie." The waitress, a young woman named Becky, approached cautiously. Her name tag was crooked, and she clutched her order pad like a shield. Good morning, gentlemen," she said nervously. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Just coffee, please," Marcus replied. "And maybe some of that pecan pie." She smiled faintly and turned to leave, but her pace quickened. Behind the counter, another waitress whispered something to the cook, who raised an eyebrow. The veterans weren't fools. They'd seen this look before at airports, gas stations, even during their time in service. Suspicion followed them like a shadow. But they didn't come to pick a fight. They just wanted pie. Then, the front door slammed open. Boots thudded against the floor. Officer Rick Granger entered like a storm. Stiff uniform, mirrored sunglasses still on despite being indoors, and the kind of presence that demanded attention. Everyone in the diner straightened up. Some nodded. Others just looked away. Granger's eyes scanned the room and landed on the 2 black men in uniform. He stopped and smirked. Without a word of greeting, Officer Granger marched directly toward the booth where James and Marcus sat. He moved like a man used to being feared. With one hand resting on his belt, fingers near his holstered weapon, he leaned forward. "You 2 lost?" he said with a sneer. "This ain't a bus station." James looked up calmly. "No, sir. Just here for some coffee." Granger's voice grew louder. "Who said you could sit there? This is a private establishment. You got permission." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Didn't realize we needed permission to eat breakfast." "You trying to be smart?" the officer snapped. His tone turned more aggressive. "Don't play games with me." The diner went silent again. All eyes were on the booth. Granger glanced around dramatically, as if inviting backup from the other diners. No one said a word. Most stared down at their plates, pretending to ignore what was happening. James slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out his military ID. "We serve our country," he said firmly. 2 tours. This uniform? We earned it. Granger didn't even look at the ID. "I don't care what patch is on your sleeve. You don't belong here. This is my town." James kept his tone measured. "Then maybe your town needs to catch up with your country." Marcus leaned forward slightly, not intimidated. "Funny thing about America, officer, freedom doesn't stop at the counter line." The waitress Becky hovered behind the counter, visibly torn. She stepped forward, voice shaky. "Officer Granger, they haven't done anything wrong. They ordered like anyone else." Granger turned to her sharply. "You stay out of this, missy. This ain't your concern." "Yes, it is," she replied softly. The officer's posture stiffened, but he didn't respond. He turned back to the veterans. "You've got 5 seconds to leave, or I'll make you leave." The threat was clear, but James didn't move. Instead, he reached into his jacket again, this time unfolding a small, creased letter with an official seal. The paper was old but proud, signed by the Secretary of Defense himself. "This letter," James said, laying it flat on the table, "is a commendation for valor. Marcus and I pulled 6 men out of a burning vehicle under enemy fire. We didn't ask what color their skin was. We just saved them." He slid it toward Granger, but the officer barely glanced at it. "I'm not interested in your little war stories," he muttered. James's voice remained steady. It's not a story. It's our lives. Becky stepped closer. He's telling the truth. I Googled him. There's a news article about it just last week. Granger scoffed. What? You gonna believe the internet now? Before anyone could respond, a deep voice came from the back of the room. My boy didn't make it back from Afghanistan, said an elderly man in a John Deere cap. Men like them? They're the reason some of ours did. The diner shifted. Granger turned slowly toward the voice. You got something to say, Jerry? Jerry nodded. Yeah, you're out of line. Another voice joined in. Me too, said a middle-aged woman near the jukebox. These men have more honor than you ever showed. Marcus looked around, surprised. People were finally speaking up. A man in flannel stood. You threatened veterans in a public diner. That's shameful. The tide was turning. No longer silent spectators. The diners had become allies. Granger's hand drifted away from his belt. I'm the law here, he barked. No, James said, standing tall. You're the problem here. Suddenly, the bell above the door jingled again. A second officer stepped inside, Deputy Morales. Everyone turned. What's going on here? Morales asked. Granger straightened. I've got under control. Morales scanned the room, reading the tension instantly. Becky stepped forward. No, you don't. He threatened to arrest them for ordering pie. Morales looked from Becky to James and Marcus, then to Granger. Rick, step outside. Now. Officer Granger didn't move right away. His jaw clenched, eyes narrowing behind his sunglasses. The authority he once carried like a badge of pride was crumbling before the eyes of the very people he expected to support him. Deputy Morales stood firm. Rick, I said step outside. You serious? Granger barked. I was handling a situation. No, you were abusing it. Morales replied firmly. And this isn't your first time. Granger looked stunned. So you're siding with them? Morales took a breath and lowered his voice so only those nearby could hear. I'm siding with what's right. And this town is tired of pretending you represent that. The silence in the diner was thicker than ever. Even the sound of the fryer in the kitchen seemed to pause. Finally, Granger turned sharply, pushing through the door with a loud thud that made the bell jingle violently. He stormed outside, fists clenched, but no one followed. Everyone watched from inside. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Morales turned to James and Marcus. I apologize for what just happened, he said sincerely. You deserve better. James gave a respectful nod. Thank you, officer. You're both welcome in this town. And I'm going to make sure Granger answers for today. Morales turned to Becky. Can I count on your statement? Becky nodded without hesitation. Absolutely. He humiliated them, threatened them for no reason. Another patron raised a hand. I'll give a statement too. Me too, said Jerry from the back. Before long, a list of volunteers began to form. Ordinary citizens ready to speak up, not out of guilt, but out of awakening. It was clear that something had shifted. Marcus leaned into James. Can you believe this is happening? James gave a soft smile. Yeah, people are tired of watching. They want to be heard. Deputy Morales offered one last firm nod and left to confront Granger outside. Inside, calm began to return. Becky brought fresh coffee and replaced the now-cold pie with warm slices. This one's on the house, she said quietly. You don't have to do that, Marcus replied. Yes, I do, Becky said. Because standing up to people like him, that's the America I believe in. The diners who had spoken up slowly returned to their seats, but the energy in the room had changed. They weren't just patrons anymore. They were witnesses to a turning point. A collective stand against a pattern too long ignored. As James and Marcus sipped their coffee, James looked out the window at Granger's car still parked outside. Funny thing, he said. I've stood in war zones with bullets flying, but some of the scariest battles happen right here at home. Marcus nodded. At least this time, we weren't alone. The sun cast a golden hue across the street as James and Marcus stepped out of the diner, the warmth of the day brushing against their uniforms. But inside, something much warmer had begun to stir, the heat of awakening, of realization, of change. They didn't walk away in triumph or anger. They walked away in calm, carrying themselves with the same dignity they had worn on the battlefield. But behind them, The ripple they left in that small-town diner had only just begun to expand. Back inside, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What was once a place where unspoken rules and silent prejudice lingered in the air now buzzed with conversation, self-reflection, and even quiet remorse. Becky, the young waitress who had bravely stood up to Officer Granger, was now being approached by several customers. "You did good, kid," said Jerry, the old farmer from the back booth. He'd barely spoken during his breakfast, but now his voice was steady with conviction. Becky tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, slightly embarrassed. "I didn't really do anything. I just couldn't stay quiet." Jerry smiled. "That's everything." The woman near the jukebox, who earlier had called out Granger's behavior, joined in. "I've lived in this town all my life. Too many times I've watched people like him walk in and act like they own the place. You made the rest of us realize we don't have to stay silent anymore." A few more customers nodded. Someone clapped lightly. No one applauded with fanfare. It wasn't that kind of moment, but there was something noble in the silence that followed. It was the sound of people starting to look inward. At the counter, Morales returned, his face composed. Becky looked up. "What happened out there?" He sighed. "Granger suspended until further notice. Internal reviews being filed. Honestly, it's long overdue." Her eyes widened. "You really think something will come of it?" Morales gave a small, tired smile. "I do now." Meanwhile, James and Marcus walked slowly down the sidewalk toward the park nearby. Neither spoke for the first few blocks. They just let the silence settle. Finally, Marcus broke it. "Did you expect it to go down like that?" James chuckled softly. "I didn't even expect the pie to be that good." Marcus grinned. "Fair enough. But seriously, I've been in firefights with less tension than that diner. Difference is, at least in combat, you know who the enemy is," James said. "Back here, it's the people who smile while they judge you. The ones who say nothing." Marcus nodded, his tone reflective. "But some of them spoke today. That means something." James turned to look at him. "Yeah, it means they were waiting for someone else to speak first." They reached the park bench near a war memorial, a granite slab with names of fallen soldiers etched into its surface. James ran a hand across the cool stone. "You ever think about the ones we lost?" Marcus asked. "Every day," James replied. He knelt down to read a name near the bottom. Specialist Tyler Griggs. "Saved my life once," James said. Didn't make it back himself. They stood in silence for a long moment, honoring those who had given everything. Then, without a word, James reached into his pocket and unfolded Becky's note. Marcus read it over his shoulder. "She wrote that." James nodded. "It meant more than she knows." Back at the diner, Becky was cleaning up when a woman entered. Someone no one expected. "Is Officer Granger here?" she asked. "No, ma'am," Becky replied. "He left a while ago." The woman nodded. "Good. I'm his sister. Heard what happened. Drove straight here from the next town." Becky was caught off guard. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "No, don't apologize," the woman interrupted. "I've been ashamed of him for a long time. Maybe this was the wake-up call he needed. Maybe it's the one we all needed." She turned to leave, but not before looking around the diner. "Thank you for standing up. Not just for those men, but for everyone watching." Becky stood frozen, unsure how to respond. But the weight of the moment sank deep. This wasn't just about a single confrontation anymore. It was a crack in something old, a crack that might finally let the light in. The next day, the story began spreading. A local newspaper ran a headline: "Veterans harassed, community stands together." Photos from cell phones, taken discreetly during the confrontation, began circulating online. One image showed James and Marcus sitting calmly, while Granger towered over them, red-faced with anger. Another captured Becky standing between them, pie in hand, refusing to back down. By the end of the week, the story was picked up by regional news outlets. Becky received a letter from a veterans advocacy group thanking her for her courage. Morales received calls from officials in nearby counties, asking about the department's internal review. And the diner? It was busier than ever, not because people wanted pie, but because they wanted to be part of something real. Even school teachers came by with students, turning the diner into a quiet lesson on modern history. One day, as Becky wiped down a table, a young girl approached her shyly. Are you the one who told the mean cop he was wrong? Becky smiled. I guess I am. My teacher said that was brave. I want to be brave too. Becky knelt down and looked her in the eyes. Then remember, brave doesn't mean loud. It just means not letting fear decide for you. The girl grinned and skipped back to her class. Weeks passed. Officer Granger was formally dismissed after multiple complaints were uncovered during the investigation. For years, people had let things slide. But after what happened in the diner, the town finally said, enough. James and Marcus returned once more before leaving town. They didn't announce their visit. They just came in, ordered coffee and pie, and sat quietly. When Becky saw them, her face lit up. Was starting to think you forgot us. Never, James said. We figured we owed you a proper goodbye. You already gave us a proper wake-up call, she replied. As they finished their pie, several diners walked over, not just to shake hands, but to share thanks, stories, even tears. One man revealed his father had served in Korea and faced similar prejudice. Another said he'd called out discrimination at his job because of what he witnessed that day. James and Marcus didn't set out to make a statement, but they had. They left the diner with one last quiet exchange. Marcus placed a folded cloth patch, the American flag, on the counter. For the next time someone asks if they belong, he said. Becky took the flag with reverence and pinned it behind the counter next to the pie menu. As they drove out of town, Marcus looked in the rearview mirror. You think this will stick? He asked. James, watching the horizon, gave a slight nod. Change doesn't come with noise. It comes with courage. Enough people found theirs that day. He turned to Marcus. And if it fades, we'll come back. They didn't drive off as heroes. They drove off as men who had served their country, faced injustice, and stood tall without throwing a single punch. And because of that, because they had the strength to stay calm, the wisdom to speak truth, and the patience to believe in better, a small town learned a powerful lesson. Sometimes the real war is fought not on foreign soil, but right here, across tables, through conversations, and inside hearts that finally decide to listen.